At the time of making this, there's been a lot of rumors and discussion of McMillan not being viewed as a top receiver and having the potential to slide in the draft. I personally think it's a bit overblown, but I think I can explain where some of that talk is coming from. Hey y'all! For this video, we'll be continuing going through the 2025 wide receiver prospects. For the penultimate part, we have a lot of exciting receivers ranging from possible top receivers to sleeper prospects as well, as I'll be covering Tai Felton from Maryland, Tetairoa McMillan from Arizona, Tez Johnson from Oregon, Theo Wease Jr. from Missouri, and Tory Horton from Colorado State. If you're new to these, my wide receiver evals use some different grading methods, which you want more details on these, you can check out part 1 of the series, which should be accessible at the link that should be on the screen now, as I have more details than that on how I do my grading. Also, if you want to check out my grades and evals of receivers from last year for reference, you can check that out with a link in the description. For any new viewers, I have evals and full scouting reports out for players like Emeka Egbuka, Elikayo Manor, Isaiah Bond, Jack Besh, Jalen Royals, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel, Isaiah Bond, Kyle Williams, Luther Burn III, Matthew Golden, Nick Nash, Pat Bryant, and more, where you can check it out on my channel. I'll be finishing on my top 50 wide receivers in the draft later this week, so to be sure you don't miss that final part of the receiver series or any other positional groups in the series, be sure to subscribe. Now let's take a look at Felton. Starting with a look at Felton's basic stats, he has greatly improved these past few years, finishing with 23 receptions, 309 yards, and 2 touchdowns as a sophomore, 48 receptions, 732 yards, and 6 touchdowns as a junior, and now capped off his career finishing with 96 receptions, 1,124 yards, and 9 touchdowns. So while a number of people will point to Felton as a one-year wonder, there is a clear progression that we can see throughout his career. Unfortunately, what we also see increase was the number of drops and his drop rate, finishing at 8 drops in the year for a drop rate of 7.7%. Also, Felton continued to play the majority of his snaps from the outside, but did play nearly 30% of his snaps from the slot as well. Taking a look at his highlight games against Penn State, Oregon, and Indiana, he was a lot more consistent of a force than his teammate Caden Prather, getting at least 4 receptions and 27 yards to each of the highlighted games. He didn't have huge games, with his Oregon game being likely the best of the highlighted games with 7 receptions for 72 yards, but that also came in a blowout and on 15 targets, so that makes it a little bit less impressive. Look at the rest of his games throughout this season, he was regularly leaned on with at least 5 receptions in every single game and at least 50 yards in every game other than his Penn State and Indiana game. Similar to the Oregon game, there were a number of games when Maryland was trailing for a lot of the games, which did cause them to be more pass-friendly, but it was at least good to see that Felton was able to earn those targets in those situations. However, to see if Felton is just a garbage time warrior, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, he has great hands to be a reliable receiver. He consistently catches the ball away from his body and has late hands to make it hard for defenders to make a play on the ball. He also showed really great ability to be able to adjust to throws that are off target as well. Down the field, he can operate like a center fielder with the way he can track the ball over his shoulders and effortlessly finish catches. He also showed very good awareness around the sidelines to finish catches in bounds as well. Unfortunately, he seems to lack the hamstring and measurables to make him as good in contested catch situations as I've seen some other people try to suggest. He has small hands, arm length, and wingspan for his size, with 9-inch hands, 30-inch arms, and 72 and 6/8 wingspan. The 9-inch hands are a bit small for his size, but his arm length and wingspan are more aligned with players less than 6 feet tall. So Felton had a bit of a seesaw start with an A- for his hands, a C for his jump ball and contested catch, and then back to an A- for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running release, he has quick feet and some good footwork on his breaks to be able to help get open and establish leverage quickly. However, he did run a pretty limited route tree and needs to work on his cuts. While he does often break down in his cuts, he doesn't always explode out of his breaks, which can cause a little bit of difficulty getting separation. Also, he will often rush his cuts, leading to them being a bit rounded as well. I was also a little bit disappointed to see his limited vertical ability with his athleticism and size. He often struggled to stack his defenders and could often lose leverage on downfield routes. Part of the issue is that he really struggles with holding his route path and not getting redirected by corners. He often could avoid this issue on shorter patterns, but was unavoidable on deeper concepts. It's just way too easy for a defender to be able to stonewall his route path, and he has just so much trouble trying to disengage from contact that it often takes him out of play. Those issues with physicality also show in his limited experience against press. For the season, he was often protected from press due to being put in motion or being set away from the line. However, the times he did face press were often pretty ugly. He had poor hand counters, and his feet also weren't quick enough to be able to keep himself clean. Also, he seemed to have a limited release package, which made him easy to predict his move as well. So Felton ended up going back down the seesaw and ended up at the low point with a C for his route running and a D+ for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role in athleticism or RAS, he has a very fluid transition from receiver to runner, which is impressive at his size. He also has a very quick acceleration and great top speed to run past defenders. He even shows some good ability to be able to make defenders miss with some well-timed cuts and good pad level in his runs. Also, he does a good job keeping his legs moving to at least try to pick up a few extra yards when he is brought down. He also shows some good vision, which seems to translate from his experience as a returner. Speaking of being a returner, he has a lot of versatility that he can offer with his experience as a returner, on the outside, in the slot, and being used in motion. He certainly is a good athlete, but he doesn't look like a top-tier athlete with great explosiveness like his RAS score indicates due to some stiffness. He's often a bit stiff with his change of direction ability, needing an extra step or two to change his direction. Also, he's a poor blocker who often lacks the physicality and leverage to hold his block. As for how he fits in the NFL, I do have worries if he isn't as talented as his target load may suggest, and the games against better competition do scare me. On top of that, he has a string bean frame that will cause issues against NFL coverage and likely lead to issues in him overcoming press coverage. It was already a struggle for him in college, and it's only going to get worse in the NFL. His best bet will likely to play as a Z to be able to avoid press. However, just as slot receivers being a bit pigeonholed, this could pigeonhole Felton as well. So hopefully his experience as a returner makes him a bit more interesting in the NFL team to give him a chance. So Felton earned just a C+ for his yards after catch potential and future role, but finished with a strong A for his athleticism or RAS. As some of his strengths, he is capable of making some really tough body adjustments to finish catches and can easily track the ball downfield. Also, when he's going out on his routes, he can quickly establish leverage to give the quarterback an early throwing window. Once he makes the catch, he shows some good speed, acceleration, and vision to get yards after the catch. Finally, he shows some good versatility as size being used inside, outside, and as a returner to give him a better chance of landing and sticking on a roster. Now, while he might be able to stay on a roster, he might get limited work due to his lack of success against pressing physical coverage. To make things worse, he's also a pretty limited route runner and struggling in contested catch situations, which will likely further limit the potential impact he could have in the NFL. To add to possible red flags, he's also pretty stiff after the catch, which may not let him pay off with his athleticism after the catch, as many would hope based off his RAS score. So by taking the average of all his grades, Felton earned a 2.67 out of 4, which puts him in my may have a future role tier. Though there are aspects that do make me interested in Felton, I can't help but shake the feeling that his limitations will make it hard for him to make it in the NFL. He has a thin frame and has serious issues against press and in contested catch situations that often kill thinner receivers' careers. Add in his limited route tree, and it gets a bit tricky to be able to trust that he'll be able to put it all together for the NFL. As I mentioned, he has steadily increased his contributions and ability every year in college, but continuing that in the NFL is just a whole nother beast. As for a comp, I have Isaiah Coulter as his comp. Both have a good size and great athleticism to make them intriguing players. Also, both have very good ball tracking skills and foot speed that show the potential to win in more diverse ways. However, both struggle against physicality in their routes and against press. Both also ran limited route trees, which could further limit them in the NFL. Coulter looks like he's been having trouble sticking with teams even outside the NFL, and while I'm more optimistic about Felton making it since I think this is more of a low-end projection for him, I do have similar concerns as both have similar limitations, which shows what Felton's worst-case scenario could be. Going to the next receiver and one of the biggest names at the position and in the draft in general, Tetairoa McMillan from Arizona. Starting with a look at his basic stats, after having a breakout year in 2023, the Arizona offense dealt with a lot of struggles after the departure of former head coach Jedd Fisch. Despite those struggles, McMillan still managed to put up very similar numbers in 2024, getting 130 targets for 84 receptions, 1,319 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Now, unfortunately, the thing that did increase significantly was his drops and his drop rates, as he had 7 drops for a drop rate of 7.7% in 2024. What did stay consistent, though, was him splitting time outside and in the slot, with slightly more than a fifth of his snaps coming from the slot. Looking at highlight games against Colorado, BYU, and Kansas State, these games are a bit complicated due to Arizona losing by a significant margin, leading to McMillan getting more targets. In fact, that was an issue for the majority of the season for Arizona, to be honest. Regardless, he had a great game against Kansas State with 11 receptions and 138 yards, an okay game when factoring in his 2 drops against BYU by making 5 receptions for 78 yards, and then an okay game by most player standards, but a bad game by his standards against Colorado with 5 receptions for just 38 yards. I mentioned it was bad by his standards because he was incredibly consistent throughout his entire season with at least 5 receptions in all but one of his 12 2024 games and had less than 50 yards in just 2 of them. In addition to that consistency, he also exploded with some games with 5 games being over 100 yards receiving and even 2 games with over 200 yards. So with the stats looking good, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch by control and ball tracking, he catches the ball with good late hands and with good hand technique. He also mostly shows good ball tracking skills and consistently catches the ball away from his body to not give the defense much of a chance to be able to make a play on the ball with his long arms. What also makes him a very friendly target is his consistent ability to work back to the ball. Also, a lot of times, long, lanky receivers often have trouble finishing catches through contact, kind of similar to Tai Felton. However, McMillan is excellent at this and converted on 60% of his opportunities in 2024 and has converted on nearly 50% of his opportunities throughout his career. Also, sometimes thinner pass catchers are afraid of contact, but he showed little hesitation making catches over the middle of the field. It likely isn't surprising, but he is a deadly jump ball threat as well. He He has such great concentration to be able to finish jump ball opportunities and can make some really impressive body adjustments even along the sidelines. He also has some really great timing and is even capable of jumping through contact to make plays on throws. Now while he is great at making plays on throws, he can make things a bit more difficult by needing to jump around the defender instead of boxing them out. There were also a few instances when it seemed like he was attacking the ball with improper hand technique and also sometimes had the ball sneak up on him. Now I didn't think it happened a lot, but he'll just have to be able to ensure that he is maintaining his focus to help limit his drops and maximize opportunities. So McMillan gets off to a good start with a B+ for his hands, A- for his jump ball contested catch, and another B+ for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running and release, there just aren't a lot of players who are 6'4" and as fluid athletes as McMillan. That fluidity shows in all his routes as he can break down and make clean cuts on whip and outbreaking routes to leave the defender in the dust. He's also able to create separation thanks to a good understanding of how to get cornerbacks' hips turned around and then attack their blind spot. Though he wasn't always given the chance to do so, he is capable of running a full route tree. He also has great use of tempo to make some of the more simple routes harder to cover. If he doesn't win with his route or the play breaks down, he is a great improviser who's very good at finding openings in the defense. Also, he showed some flashes of really impressive footwork and timing at the line of scrimmage to get clean releases when the defenders are hesitant. He has a lot of potential to get clean releases thanks to his fluid movements and long arms. That being said, I was a bit disappointed with how often he was able to win against physical coverage. He's just way too willing to let the defender initiate contact and lets the defender get an edge on the play. That makes things much tougher for McMillan than they need to be and forces him to win with his quality routes. Even if he does win, he can often be thrown off his intended route path and can disrupt the timing of the play. The disappointing part of that is that he has such long arms and he just doesn't use them efficiently enough. Usually his counters are a bit delayed and weak and are just more of wasted motion. Also, it's one thing for him to have struggles clearing initial contact, but he struggled to disengage from physical coverage, leading to the corner being so close to his pocket and increasing the number of times he had to make a catch through contact. Also, while he is capable of running a diverse route tree thanks to his cuts, again, he did run a pretty simplified route tree with a number of drag routes over the middle, so he just has to really prove that throughout a full season that he can actually handle a diverse route tree. So while McMillan earned a great B+ for his route running, he earned just a C for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role in athleticism or RAS, once he makes the catch, he becomes an immediate threat with essentially no hitch in his transition from pass catcher to runner and has great peripheral awareness to know where he should go. As he is fluid in his route running, he also has more wheel than you expect for a player his size out in space and can sometimes get defenders to miss on jukes. He also has really good curvilinear movement to quickly change course of direction without losing much speed to escape defenders. However, he has pretty disappointing contact balance and typically will go down at first contact. Also, his effort and technique as a blocker are disappointing as he's way too upright in his stance and just like his release, has poor hand usage. As for how he fits in the NFL, at the time of making this, there's been a lot of rumors and discussion of McMillan not being viewed as a top receiver and having the potential to slide in the draft. I personally think it's a bit overblown, but I think I can explain where some of that talk is coming from. So with McMillan's size and ball skills, I think a lot of teams are viewing him as a traditional X receiver. However, the more you watch him, the more his struggles against press and holding up against physical coverage on deeper concepts, which X receivers have to be able to do, start to pile up. So I think a lot of teams had that wrench thrown into their projections and start to panic about how he fits in the NFL. However, if teams are concerned about his release, he has a lot of experience playing out wide in the slot and in motion to be able to add more versatility. So I think the ideal move for him would be able to use him as a Z receiver and a slot receiver, similar to how the Lions are using Amon-Ra St. Brown, until he can polish up his release skills enough to be able to consistent playmaker from the outside. He has the route running, size, ball skills, and enough athleticism to be a really great receiver, so I just think it's really important for teams not to overthink this one. So McMillan earned a B for his yards after catch potential, B+ for his future role, and an estimated A- for athleticism or RAS, which may feel generous with how overtalked his 40-yard dash time, but I think he'd likely fall into that area if he did his jumps thanks to his size. For a summary of his strengths, he has a really impressive blend of size and athleticism that's so rare at the receiver position that gave him a huge catch radius to catch nearly any ball in his zip code. What makes him even more interesting is the ability to finish catches through contact, especially since a lot of taller, thinner receivers like him often can struggle in this area. Despite his size, he's still a very clean route runner who can bring some excellent nuance to get consistent separation. That makes him more than just a one-note big body jump ball type of receiver, and he also proved he's able to run routes, move in motion, beat you deep, beat you underneath, and honestly just do whatever the offense needs. However, something he still struggles with is his ability to overcome physical coverage and press. That often held him back too often, and he needs to use his long arms and hands to be able to win more consistently. Also, he had a few lapses of misreading throws and going with improper hand technique, which he will need to clean up to be able to win as consistently in jump ball situations. Also, while he is fluid out in space, I'd like to see him run with a bit more better balance to be able to be even more of a threat after the catch. Finally, if he does eventually move to being an X receiver, I really want to see his effort and technique improve in his blocking to not frustrate a coaching staff. So by taking the average of all his grades, McMillan earned a 3.21 out of 4, which puts him in my good starter tier. Before his recent fall, I've seen McMillan touted as the next great wide receiver, and while I have been a fan of him in these past few years, I do think there's a little bit more risk than some people wanted to admit back then. His release is really concerning, and it's something I haven't really seen much improvements in since 2023. NFL coaching could improve that, but if it doesn't, he could have issues winning on the outside. With the degree of difficulty going up in the NFL, he may have trouble being as consistent of a contributor as he was in college with his current struggles. Now the good thing is he is such a fluid athlete capable of making some great cuts to create separation regardless of press. Also, he's very comfortable being used in motion and playing from the slot. So teams have ways to be able to work around that. As I mentioned before, I think the ideal spot for him would be play as the Z, which potentially he could do for his entire career, or at the very least until he's able to clean up his release. As a comp, after months of fighting to try to make it clear that Mike Evans was not a good comp for McMillan, it seems that most people have finally seen the light are in agreement with my midseason comp of Drake London, which I'm going to stick with here. Now, I will admit it's not a perfect comp since McMillan is a more fluid and quick athlete than London. However, both have inside-outside potential and really impressive route running skills despite not having the most expansive route tree. Also, both have big frames and are very good at attacking the ball in the air and timing their attacks to give defenders a little chance to break it up. Both are also great in contested catch situations and are comfortable making catches in the middle of the field. However, both can also struggle with keeping on their route path due to some work needed in the release. I feel London was a bit further along in his release than McMillan, so I'm not certain that McMillan will be able to provide the consistent impact London did as a rookie, especially if a team tries to play McMillan as the X. However, if they move him to the Z and let him find space and get clean breaks, he will likely be a great playmaker for a team. Going to our next receiver, Tez Johnson from Oregon. After putting together a really great statistical season last season, his raw receiving yards did decrease to 898 yards. But it is important to note that if you break it down to the games he actually played the entirety of, his average yards per game was about the same in 2023 and 2024. Also, his targets, receptions, and touchdowns were all nearly or exactly the same compared to 2023, despite playing in fewer games, as he had 101 targets, 83 receptions, and 10 touchdowns in 2024. Now, what did go down from his raw total and rate perspective was his drops, which is 3 drops for a drop rate of 3.5% in 2024. He also saw his slot percentage drop slightly, with it dropping to about 80% while getting more snaps outside. Looking at his highlight games of both Ohio State matchups and against Penn State, he was a bit all over the place with a great game against Penn State with 11 reception, 181 yards, and a touchdown, a good game in his first matchup against Ohio State with 7 receptions for 75 yards, and then an okay game at best in his rematch against Ohio State with 5 receptions for 32 yards. Looking at his season as a whole to try to make sense of it, he was consistently involved with at least 5 receptions and or 50 yards in 8 of his 12 games, which really could be counted as 8 of 11 due to missing the majority of the Michigan game due to a shoulder injury. So that involvement is really good to see. Though this is supposed to be just look at his basic stats, I do want to break up his ADOT or average depth of target though. In 2023, Johnson had a low ADOT of 7.6%, but actually saw that drop even further to just 5.9 in 2024. That is an incredibly low mark and led to about 67% of his yards coming after the catch. So to see if he's more of a screen throw and screen guy or if he can get himself open, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, though most of his targets were close to the line of scrimmage, he looked to have good ball tracking skills on deep targets, including being able to finish catches over his shoulders. He also showed good ability to adjust to balls that were off his frame and made attacks with good timing. He also has a better than expected wingspan, which helps give him a bigger catch radius than other receivers his height when he extended his arms out for catches. The big issue though is hoping that he does extend his arms out to make that catch. More times than not, he was often willing to settle on body catches instead of catching the ball with his hands. Also, he continued to struggle with converting contested catch situations with a success rate of just 33.3% in 2024. And though he only had 3 opportunities in those situations in 2024, he has had those issues throughout his entire career, in part due to not extending his arms out. So Johnson is a bit all over the place with a B for his hands, a C for his jump ball and contested catch, and then a good B+ for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running release, his movement skills and quick feet are also some of his best assets in his route running. He's able to use his quickness and explosiveness to create early separation and have quick cuts. Also, he does a good job getting his defender to break one way and then burst to the other with the opening he created. He has a really good eye for openings against zone coverage, which will likely be necessary if he's limited to the slot in the NFL. However, with his decreasing ADOT, his route tree didn't become much more diverse compared to 2023 and instead regressed in some ways. He just seems so limited winning with his routes around the line of scrimmage that it makes it hard to envision him in a normal NFL offense. Now, his ball tracking skills do suggest that he can win downfield more, but he just needs to prove it to coaches. Regardless for the routes he ran, he often lacked nuance and tempo in them. When he did try to use some deception, he often tried to be too fancy with his cuts, which didn't let him be a ready pass catcher quickly enough for the quarterback. Also, he would often just try to simply run his routes as quickly as he could, which often led to sloppy cuts. His small frame also, of course, will limit his success as he especially struggles with aggressive coverage and is often redirected on his route path. Also, his smaller side made it difficult for him to be able to stay clean in his release or be at risk of the press taking him out of the play, which led to a lot of his horizontal movements to try to desperately avoid contact at times. He didn't try to go for them too much, but his arm counters were typically too weak to be able to have meaningful success against press. So while he does have good foot speed to be able to maybe have a slim chance of playing outside, his slim frame will likely limit him to being a slot receiver. So Johnson ended up earning a C+ for his route running and just a D+ for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role and athleticism were RAS. He's great at getting out in short patterns and making a very quick and fluid transition from receiver to runner to quickly get downfield. He has great acceleration to get to full speed very quickly and has very good cuts and suddenness to make defenders miss in space. He also shows very impressive vision with the ball in his hands. He not only can find the best route to take even if it's in his peripheral vision, but he also knows how to set up his blocks to create running lanes thanks to his experience as a returner. He was also an effective returner thanks to his great movement skills that let him change direction very quickly and shift his speed to good defenders off balance. Now while he is quick, his small frame often limits his ability to survive first contact. Also his frame limits his ability to contribute as a blocker as well. As for how he fits in the NFL, while others may be more optimistic about him, I just do have worries about how he can consistently help an NFL offense. Don't get me wrong, he's very good at short routes and in after the catch situations. However, those types of situations are less necessary in the NFL due to tighter space. Plus with him being limited to the slot and struggling against physical coverage, I think he's just going to be way too limited to be counted on an every play basis, and maybe more of a scheme player in the NFL for occasional design touches or when the team needs a useful outlet option. So Johnson ended up getting a very good B+ for his yards after catch potential, but just a C+ for his future role and athleticism or RAS. And as summary of his strengths, Johnson showed great vision that carried over from his return experience. Also, he's very quick to make defenders miss in space, but can also use that quickness to create early separation in his routes and breaks. Also, though he does most of his work close to the line of scrimmage, he did show flashes of good ball tracking skills down the field to potentially give him more of a diverse arsenal. Also, though he has a small build, he's very comfortable making adjustments to throws to help expand his catch radius. Despite being able to expand his catch radius, he doesn't do this consistently enough, which has contributed to poor success in contested catch situations throughout his career. Throughout his career, he also struggled to expand his route tree, which may concern NFL teams. Also, limited ability to withstand press and physical coverage due to his small frame may further concern teams and limit the ways he can positively impact an NFL offense from an every play basis. So by taking the average of all his grades, Johnson earned a 2.5 out of 4, which puts him in my may have a future role tier. I think at this point, Combine has calmed down a lot of the excitement about Johnson. Honestly, even if he lit up the Combine, it's just hard for receivers with his frame to be successful in the NFL. There's just way too many ways to be able to stop them with physical coverage, and the reduction in space often nullifies their success after the catch. Tank Dell is the best recent example of a player defying those poor odds, but he's also a very different player to Johnson as he played the majority of snaps outside and had a better foundation of his release. So as for a comp other than Tank Dell, I have Ryan Switzer as Johnson's comp. Both have good foot speed and acceleration to help them get early separation and make plays after the catch. Also, both have a good understanding of how to give themselves a chance to beat press thanks to their quick feet. Both can also get good leverage in their routes. However, both are body catchers and don't often finish catches through contact. Also, neither have big frames, which can cause difficulties against physical coverage as well. Switzer struggled in the NFL in part due to his size, and I have concerns the same could happen to Johnson. With his physical and technique limitations, it makes it hard to be overly optimistic about his outlook, at least in my opinion. Going to our next receiver, Theo Wease Jr. from Missouri. Start with a look at his basic stats. As I mentioned in Luther Burn III section in his part, Wease put together a good year statistically despite the poor quarterback play at Missouri. He was able to get 89 targets for 60 receptions, 884 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Despite career high in target load, he only had 2 drops for a drop rate of 3.2%. Also, just as he's done throughout his entire career, he played the majority of snaps outside, playing 86.6% of his snaps from the outside. Taking a look at his highlight games against South Carolina, Alabama, and Texas A&M, he had very good games against South Carolina, getting 10 targets for 6 receptions and 85 yards. However, his games against Alabama and Texas A&M were underwhelming, with just 2 receptions for 19 yards against Alabama in what was a blowout, and 2 receptions for 72 yards and a touchdown against Texas A&M, which on paper does sound good, but 59% of those yards and the touchdown came on a single pass when the game was essentially over. Looking at the rest of his games, while his reception total is solid, he only had 5 more receptions in 5 of his 13 games, which include their bowl game when Burn didn't play, as well as their matchup against Buffalo. Speaking of that matchup against Buffalo, he also got slightly over a fifth of his season total receptions in that game, and about 17% of his yards in the game as well. So him not being productive in the rest of the games against quality opponents does make so him not being as productive in the rest of the games against quality opponents while Burton was on the field is a bit concerning. But to see how much of that was due to any lack of talent or more due to poor quarterback play, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, he has great hands thanks to always having great hand technique with catches. He consistently will high point the ball with his big frame and is clearly very comfortable making catches away from his frame. Also, he's very capable of making tough adjustments to balls, going low as well as going high up for balls to be able to get his hands on the ball. He even showed good awareness around the sidelines to be able to finish catches and keep both feet in bounds. Also, he makes himself an easier target by consistently working back to the quarterback as well. Also, while his contested catch rate was disappointing at 36.4% in 2024, he was previously very good in this area with a success rate of 66.7% in 2023 and 55.6% in 2022. However, that drop in success in contested catch situations can't be ignored in case it does become the new norm for him. A way I think he can get those numbers back up is by doing a better job shielding the ball from defenders. He sometimes boxes them out a bit, but doesn't often hold them back, which gives them more of a chance to be able to make a play on the ball. So Wease ended up earning a B+ for his hands, B- for his jump ball and contested catch, and A- for his body control ball tracking. For his route running release, he can make some really quick, concise cuts at times. He also showed a really good eye for his zone coverage and knew how to work himself into openings. Also, he does a good job getting leverage early in his routes to win on short and intermediate routes. He can also win early leverage thanks to his quality release skills as well. He does a good job using his long arms and quick feet to be able to beat press. However, he does lack explosiveness, which does cause him issues trying to separate underneath. Something that can at least help with his Something that I think can at least help with his underneath routes is selling his vertical a little bit more. He often doesn't press enough with this, which lets defenders be ready to jump shorter routes. Also, he can use some nuance in his routes to be able to help overcome his lack of athleticism, as he often has good focus in his cuts, but often not offer too much else in the route. Also, he did run a pretty limited route tree, which is concerning of how he'll be able to do in the NFL with a more expansive route tree. For limited routes he did run, I did notice he had a tendency to round some cuts, particularly his out routes. Finally, though his release skills are solid, his release package does seem to lack diversity, which will make it a little bit easier for NFL corners to beat him. So though there were some good elements, he earned just a C+ for his route running and B- for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role, and athleticism or RAS, despite the poor athletic testing, he actually has some pretty good ability after the catch. He has a very good transition after the catch and good peripheral vision to be able to avoid tacklers. If tacklers do get their hands on him, he does have good balance and pad level to be able to survive hits. Plus, he can sometimes make them miss thanks to his good timing. He also shows good vision after the catch and looks comfortable following his blocks as well. Now, despite his solid yards after catch fundamentals, it is a little bit hard to overlook his poor athletic testing and the number of times that defenders were able to catch him from behind. As for how he fits in the NFL, while he has very solid ball skills and good size, his lack of athleticism may lead to corners blanketing him in the NFL. Some receivers can still earn targets that way, but they often need to win the quarterback's trust to get those targets in those situations. Maybe he could get to that point, but unfortunately I worry that he'll just go the route of a lot of similar bigger body receivers with good ball skills and solid but not great fundamentals, leading to difficulties separating and difficulties earning targets, which leads to them failing to make an impression on coaching staff and quarterback, which often makes them be passed up for other players with more athletic upside. So Wease earned a B- for his yards after catch potential, despite his poor athletic testing, but earned just a C for his future role and an F+ for that athleticism or RAS due to his poor athleticism. For a summary of his strengths, he has great hands and big catch radius, which he maximizes with his length and arm extensions. Also, though he doesn't do it all the time, he does show flashes of making some clean cuts as well. Despite his limited athleticism, he also can provide some good value after the catch thanks to his vision and contact balance to help provide over the minimum. Finally, while his success in contested catch rate did drop in 2024, this has been a strength of his in the past, so I'm hopeful that it can rebound. However, if he's going to be good in contested catch situations again, he will need to do a better job using his frame to box out defenders. Also, I want to see him prove that he can not only run a diverse route tree, but can also clean up his cuts to make those clean cuts more consistently. He'll also need to expand his release package since he could run into more issues with this in the NFL. It's also important for him to address all these issues, since if he doesn't, I'm worried his limited athleticism could end up sinking his career. So by taking the average of all his grades, Wease earned a 2.46 out of 4, which puts him in my needs improvement to contribute tier. While Wease shouldn't be overlooked, I'm also just not positive of how high it's worth valuing him. His lack of athleticism already creates a big barrier to significant contribution to the NFL, and he'll need to be able to become an elite route runner and diversify his release package if he wants to become an NFL starter. Otherwise, I just kind of expect either more dynamic or more polished players to be able to jump him on the depth chart. As for a comp, I have David Bell as his comp. Both have great ball skills and big catch radii. Also, both have very reliable hands and are tough to bring down after the catch. However, both are very athletically limited, which could make separation more difficult in the NFL. Also, both don't have enough polish in their route running or release to overcome those athletic limitations at this time. Bell has struggled to make any impact, and the Cleveland Browns just keep adding receivers, which kind of signals a lack of trust in Bell's development. Hopefully Wease can do a better job developing in his key areas and work his way into a role as a receiver 3 for a team, otherwise he might just be kind of passed up like Bell has been so far. Moving to our final player of this part, and someone that I think is getting really overlooked in this process, Tory Horton from Colorado State. After putting up 96 receptions for 1,136 yards and 8 touchdowns in 2023, Horton took a chance and bet on himself to build on that success in 2024. Unfortunately, it kind of backfired with him only playing 5 games before injuring his knee and missing the rest of the season. In those 5 games, Horton got 38 targets for 26 receptions, 353 yards, and 1 touchdown. In that brief time as well, he had just 1 drop for a drop rate of 3.8% and played nearly 2/3 of his snaps from the outside. Now, despite only playing 5 games, he did have some quality opponents to choose from for his highlight games in his Oregon State game, Colorado, and Texas games. Unfortunately, he didn't impress too much in those games, especially against Colorado after talking some smack prior to the game and then going on to just get 2 receptions for 24 yards, which wasn't a good look. His game against Texas was also largely unremarkable, just 5 receptions for 31 yards, but I will admit that Colorado State's quarterback had Horton open a number of times, but just failed to either get the ball to him or just due to the pass rush and not being able to see him. Also, 31 yards doesn't sound like very much, but sadly that was 40% of the team's receiving yards for that game. However, there was no mistaking the good performance he had against Oregon State, getting 9 receptions for 158 yards and a touchdown. Look at the rest of his games, which adds in games against Northern Colorado and San Jose State. He had a good game against Northern Colorado with 3 receptions for 65 yards, and then a very good game against San Jose State, getting 7 receptions for 75 yards, before needing to leave in the 4th quarter due to his injury. So with limited info we can take away from his stats due to his limited availability in 2024, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, despite missing the majority of the 2024 season, his hands shine with tough hands capable of finishing catches through hits. Some receivers were scared to attack balls in the middle of the field, but Horton never showed any fear and would go up and get a ball even if it meant taking a hit. He consistently made catches away from his frame and showed some really impressive body adjustments to some off-target throws, as well as throw on the sidelines. He also has a very big catch radius and has great timing in his ball attacks that lets him maximize his frame and high point nearly every ball that comes his direction. His ball skills also shine in his ability to be able to track the ball downfield. He's capable of tracking the ball like a center fielder and consistently makes catches over his shoulders to give him good vertical potential. That being said, while he was solid in contested catch situations, he could make himself even more reliable by boxing out the defender with his big frame to be able to shield the ball from a breakup. So despite missing a lot of time, Horton got off to a good start with a B+ for his hands, B- for his jump ball contested catch, and A- for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running and release, he can quickly eat up a cushion thanks to his long strides and does a good job stacking his defender. He also brings good tempo to his routes to add a bit more variability to be able to make it a bit harder for defenders to keep up with him. He also has good foot speed as well as good arm length, which could help him improve his release down the road. That being said, his injury definitely complicates the evaluation, but it especially complicates it determining if he made the necessary next steps as a route runner in his release. In 2023, he ran a very high percentage of screen, short drag, and vertical patterns, so I was hopeful we would be able to see an expanded route tree. Unfortunately, with that little playing time that he had in 2024, he still seemed to run a pretty limited route tree. Maybe he would have been more involved in more complex routes later in the year, but we just don't really know, and we have to just go off of what we actually were able to see from tape. Also, on his deeper routes, he sometimes can struggle to establish leverage against better athletes, which does make his transition to the NFL a bit more worrisome. He also will typically round his cuts even when he's trying to make them more sharp, which makes it a little bit easier for defenders to cover them up. Also, he doesn't use enough nuance in his routes other than changing his tempo, which leads him to often just relying on his athleticism. He can also improve his peripheral vision against zone as he can sometimes drift towards defenders and end up covering himself up. Also, he needs to find a way to keep his balance against physical coverage. There are just so many times that defenders could essentially just knock him around and easily take him out of the play. He also has similar issues against press. He often had a delayed response against press with poor use of arm counters. He also has a limited release package, which isn't ideal for keeping a slender frame from being stuck against press. So unfortunately, things got worse for Horton with a C- for his route running and even worse D+ for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role, and athleticism with RAS, he has good balance and foot speed paired with good timing in his cuts to be able to survive arm tackles. Now, despite his lower level competition, his blocking is very good as he does a good job getting leverage and has good hand placement in most of his blocks. He can get square and set a good base to give him a good anchor while bringing some good fire to be able to drive back to defenders. Also, though I expect him to be an outside receiver in the NFL, he of course has experience out wide, but also has some experience in the slot as well. As for his future role, he kind of got screwed by his injury and a poor start for a double whammy for this year. He is limited to just 5 games and unfortunately didn't have a very big games against Texas and Colorado, which will make teams question of how he can perform against better defenders and athletes. I think it's fair to ask how he can do in underneath situations as well, but I do think his vertical ability could translate to higher levels of competition if he's able to improve his release. If he does that, then he could provide a really nice value for a team looking for a vertical weapon later in the draft. So Horton earned a B- for his yards with the catch potential, B for his future role, and continues to finish strong with an A for his athleticism or RAS. For a summary of his strengths, Horton has great hands and a big catch radius to make him a QB-friendly target. His ball tracking skills shine through traffic and down the field, which when combined with his speed and stacking ability, make him a very good vertical threat. Finally, he brings great effort and technique to be a very good blocker regardless of the level of competition he faced. However, his missed time in 2024 due to his knee injury does complicate things, as we weren't able to see the full picture of what improvements he made in 2024. Based on what we were able to see, he still ran a limited route tree that had rounded cuts throughout his routes. Also, he continued to struggle with winning against press coverage and maintaining his balance against physical coverage, which could make him less effective on vertical routes and in the NFL in general. So by taking the average of all his grades, Horton earned a 2.83 out of 4, which puts him in my good role player tier. Horton is a difficult prospect to do any evaluation on between his injury in 2024 and playing against lower competition. I likely have him higher than most people do, but I do see a lot of traits that do give me some hope. He has good size, speed, and ball skills to at least be a good vertical threat in the NFL. The big thing for him is to be able to improve his release to ensure he can continue to contribute in those situations and not be stopped at the line of scrimmage in the NFL. Anything he improves past that would be gravy. However, I hope he can at least continue to improve to be able to stack his defender down the field to be able to let his best skills shine. As for a comp, I have Alec Pierce as a comp. Both are very good vertical weapons with good size and ball skills. Although both have tough hands and can make catches at the end of their frames to add a bit more flavor to their profile. However, both benefit from playing against lower competition, what makes it questionable how they'll perform against better athletes in the NFL. Also, both struggle with physicality from corners, which can't stop them from showing off their vertical prowess as well. Pierce has become a very underrated player in our crowded receiver room that doesn't have very many opportunities to share amongst the pass catchers there. Hopefully Horton is able to go to a less crowded receiver room and show his improved release skills to be able to be a more reliable vertical threat like Pierce has become. And that's all for part 9. Let me know where your thoughts are on all the receivers in the comments and who you think I'm too high or too low on. This is part 9 of 10, so I just have one more part before moving to tight ends and then hopefully get into some non-skill position players before the draft. So be sure you don't miss the final part or any of the other position group series. Be sure to subscribe. While you're at it, like the videos, it would help the channel and this series grow thanks to you. If you want just to run for the evals, you can subscribe to my Substack and sell the full written eval out for each player at the same time as the video. But thank you all and see you all next time.